It happened. The thing you've been dreading for years finally occurred. Your family member, your friend, passed away, and they passed away outside of the Catholic Church. They did not have the brown scapular on. They did not receive last rites, nor even ask for it. You just got the news. And to add to the misery that you're going through, to add to the despair that is going through your heart, your family members and friends are bullying you and guilting you and shaming you into abandoning your values, your religious beliefs on worship, so that you can suit and fit into their idea of what grief should look like. This is something, unfortunately, that happens quite commonly to a lot of traditional Catholics. It happens to me. And it's happened to me more than once. What do you do? How do you handle it mentally, emotionally, theologically, spiritually, and practically when someone you know and love and care about dies outside of the Catholic Church, outside of traditional Catholicism, having never converted? Now, before I go any further, I'd like to dedicate this video to my neighbor Patricia Moore, who recently passed away about a week ago from the moment of my filming this video. Amazing woman. She was an employer. She was a leader in the local community. As far as a non-Catholic can be an amazing person, she absolutely was it. So in your charity, if you could say a decade or two of the rosary for her repose, I would greatly appreciate that. But wait, you can't pray for the repose of non-Catholics. More on that below. More on that to follow. Yeah, so the situation I outlined in the beginning, where you're being bullied, harassed, and everything, is certainly can be kind of a worst case scenario for some traditional Catholics, and I have been through that. Happily, I have been through other funerals of non-Catholics that I have been where it has not been as stressful or absolutely miserable. As far as the funeral of someone outside, it was more positive, at least as far as positive as a funeral for someone who died outside of the traditional Catholic faith can be. So, but before I go any further, I'd like to explain some things to non-traditional Catholics watching. So, if you're a non-traditional Catholic and you're watching this, let's say you're an atheist and you're watching this. Ever been to a Christian funeral and they're talking about how this person is in heaven and you don't believe in heaven and you're not getting anything out of the eulogy or the sermon, or it's just miserable, and you feel like you're being tricked into going to a service and you just want to remember your loved one who's passed on? Or let's say you're a Christian who's watching this and you've had to go to the funeral of your friend who's died who was Buddhist, and they're chanting all these mantras, and you're worrying about the loss of their soul, and you think that this whole totally false, and you feel very uncomfortable. Or let's say you're in these situations and you're being bullied and harassed and pulled around by the family, and you're Christian or atheist, and you're asked to read the scripture or lead in a prayer. Or you're at the Buddhist funeral and you're being asked to burn incense if you're a Christian. Or let's say you're one of these other religions and you're being asked to take part in worship actively that you positively don't believe in, that you made very clear to people before going that this is not how I relate to God. It is something I think is false. I just want to be there out of respect for the person who's passed on, and I want to grieve in my own way privately. I don't want to make a scene, and you keep on being bullied into doing things you don't believe in or don't want to do. That is a very common experience for traditional Catholics, and it's been quite common for me at non-Catholic funerals. Now, when you're doing this and you're declining, you are not being rude. You're not disrespecting the individual's memory or the person or the grief of these people who are grieving. You just have your own religious beliefs, which, even though the person has passed on, you still need to remain faithful to that. And you have your own way of grieving with this for situations like these that you just don't relate to them. Relate to these things. That is more or less where a lot of traditional Catholics are coming from when they don't want to take part in non-Catholic worship. So, for traditional Catholics again, you may attend the funeral, but there are caveats. One, strictly speaking, the allowance for non-Catholics, traditional Catholics attending non-Catholic funerals, or theoretically, depending how conservative and strict you are, even novus ordo Catholic funerals, is only supposed to apply if you are a public official. That being said, in practice, traditional priests allow laity to attend non-Catholic funerals as a matter of course. Nothing's thought of it. That being said, two, the caveat, your participation is very limited. You are to sit in the back, stand up, sit down. That is squat. Anyone who tells you that you can give the eulogy, even if they're a traditional priest in this matter, and I've seen some traditional Catholic priests give some bad advice and allow certain things which they shouldn't, and I'll explain why in a bit. If you were asked to be a pallbearer, if you were asked to give the eulogy, if you were asked to lead a hymn or give a solo, even if it's a secular song, etc., 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 you are being lied to, you are being manipulated, especially if they tell you it is not part of the religious part of the service. Your answer needs to be no. You can stand up, sit in the back, stand up, sit down, and that's it. Now, the reason I am calling out some traditional priests for giving bad advice is not that these traditional Catholic priests saying that these things are allowed are being immoral. It is not that they are being heretics, but they often do not understand Protestant worship. I'm, of course, coming up from the perspective that this video is for that you're being asked to attend a Protestant funeral, which this is an English language channel. That would probably be the most common funeral you would probably be asked to attend. That being said, you are expected to stand up, sit down. If for Protestant funerals, anything that's done as part of the service, in the context of the service, the minute they wheel the body in, when start the prayers or hymns, or the moment they wheel the body out, should be perceived as part of the service and a part of worship, even if it's a totally secular thing like a eulogy. In fact, eulogies are the central aspect of a Protestant funeral service. So or of any service, honestly. Anything that involves going up to a pew or pulpit or podium and giving a speech should be seen as worship to a certain extent. You are not permitted to do that. You are permitted to stand up and sit down in the back of the funeral. That is all what you're permitted to do. You're probably going to hear a lot of things that will jar you theologically. Like, the person is in heaven. This is actually a common reading that is given between non-Catholics, that actually to traditional Catholics it sounds incredibly offensive. I remember being hugged at the funeral of another man by his sister, a man who was like a second father to me. Again, please pray for the pose of Larry Hake. She hugged me and said, "He's okay now, he's in peace now, he's not in suffering anymore. He's in heaven now." As a traditional Catholic, I find that very offensive. Also, my grandmother's funeral. Oh, Jean Alice Labine, she is in heaven now. Again, please pray for Larry Hake and Jean Alice Labine if you're watching this. I almost jumped out of the pew and stormed out. But I had to calm myself, remembering I'm at a non-Catholic event. I am sitting in the back to be respectfully present. This is their theology. It is a theology I believe is completely false. And it is not something that you should address to a traditional Catholic. If you ever go to a traditional Catholic funeral, the presumption is that the person is in purgatory. And that is considered to be more charitable than presuming that they are in heaven. And I'll say why. So it's like that. So the way traditional Catholics, again, to any non-traditional Catholic may be watching, they presume that the person is in purgatory because if it's better than assuming they're so horrible that they are just an H-E-double-L. But it's also better than presuming they're in heaven, because if they're in heaven and you guess wrong, it'd be like passing someone with a broken tire in the middle of the road, in the middle of a wilderness. They're by themselves. They need help. You're just assuming they're okay, when actually they're in desperate need of help. We consider that to be very, very dangerous to presume the person is in heaven among traditional Catholics, as it leaves souls who are in purgatory, who need prayers, who need indulgences, who need masses said for them. It leaves them basically spiritually abandoned. So if you're non-Catholic or non-traditional Catholic and go to traditional Catholic funeral, do not tell the people that they are not suffering. Instead, say, I'll keep them in your prayers. It would be a much kinder, compassionate thing to do if you ever go to a traditional Catholic funeral. So practically, you cannot actively take part. Furthermore, you should be careful to not be bullied into it. Now, some funerals allow, most do not, unfortunately. Some do allow at the after reception to give a eulogy. That is permissible. That is another great thing for you to do, that you can do, if it's an option. But generally, it's stand up, sit down. Another thing so you've gotten through the whole service. You can sign the guest book, you can go to the wake, express your condolences, but once the prayers start, you should probably step back. Protestant wakes, in my experience, tend to be more secular events. So you can have a little more leeway with that. And also, that's something if the person was really well known, and I've seen this done with an Orthodox priest friend I knew, Father Innocent Potter. Again, please pray for his repose. He had a celebration of life in addition to his funeral. I went to both, and I was able to give a brief eulogy for him at the celebration of life. That being said, we as traditional Catholics do not deal with death by commemorating the person who lived. That is a very secondary attitude to death in our opinions. That is very much a humanist approach to death from a traditional Catholic standpoint. Traditional Catholics pray for the dead. Now, the following information I've had it confirmed by multiple priests. This is something you can do. And I received a lot of consolation about this many years ago. I remember speaking with an SSPX priest about how my grandmother died a few years ago, and I was saying how terrible I felt that I cannot even pray for repose, because it is presumed, indeed, outside the church is no salvation, and the Syllabus Severus condemned the belief that we can have great hope for those who visibly die outside the bosom of the church. That is forbidden to us. That being said, he said, actually you can, pray for her. You can always pray for the repose of someone who's passed away. Always. That is always allowed to you. Because, again, outside the church there is no salvation, yes. Can we presume that there is or have any real great hope that this person was saved if they visibly died outside the church and gave no signs of changing their opinion before death? We can't. That would just be illogical, unreasonable. That said, God has worked miracles. Case in point, the story of Father Herman Cohen's mother consecrated his mother to the Immaculate Heart of Mary every day for over 1,000 times. Eventually, because he was a saintly holy man, because he recommended her to his mother, to the Mother of God so much, he later received a revelation that said 1 second before where Jesus told him, 1 second before I became your mother's judge, I became her savior. So it can happen. Those events do happen. That being said, they're quite rare, but it does show that we should not completely fall into despondence and despair if you're a Catholic faithful to tradition. So things you can do as a Catholic. You cannot have a requiem mass said for the repose. That being said, you can have masses said for them. So, and I've done this myself for my grandmother. Get a stipend, $20 in Canada for an SSPX priest. Put it in the envelope. Say, I want this mass said for this person, and they will have you can have a mass said for the person who's passed away. The caveat, however, you must not have the name of the person who died mentioned in the canon. That is one rule. If they visibly died outside the church, you cannot mention by name in the canon when the mass is being said. Just put on the note, do not mention name in the canon. They'll still get the benefits if they converted before they passed away and they were saved. They will still receive the benefits of that mass in purgatory. But that's one rule that needs to be followed. Another thing that you can always do is you can always pray the rosary for them. I remember when I found out I could say the rosary for my departed grandmother. I guarantee you I was praying quite a few rosaries after that. You can get indulgences, Stations of the Cross. Stations of the Cross. Plenary indulgence attached to them. If you go to Holy Communion the same day you do the stations, under the usual conditions, i.e. your state of grace, you've been to confession, within about a week. You've been to communion. You pray for the intentions of the Holy Father. You do the indulgence work, and you visit a church, and you are detached from all your sins, even venial sins. Under those conditions, you can get a plenary indulgence for the person who has died. Anyone who's died. All the indulgences that apply to the dead. And we as track Catholics don't pray for our dead enough. Even we track Catholics need to start praying for our departed brothers and sisters in purgatory far more than we do. That is something you can still do. You can still have masses said. In fact, I've even found out recently that there's actually a priory in the Philippines, an SSPX priory, that has masses said for the dead monthly, no stipend required. You just have to email them, put in the name, and they'll say masses for you. Link. I'll put the email down below. And so if you got any non-Catholic or Catholic, yes, in case you're wondering, you can and should say masses for the repose of your Catholic family members. You can do that. And practical notes, maybe have some time to say some indulgence prayers, some rosaries. Go on, make the stations of the cross, and have a little extra time of prayer set aside for praying for this person who's died. After they've died, if you're fortunate enough that they have been buried in the ground, please bury people in the ground if you have the choice. At least have a gravesite for people to visit. I know people who they don't do that, and I've seen a lot of disrespect done with cremations. I've seen people's ashes left in storage closets because of cremation. Please bury people in the ground. Yes, even if you're non-Catholic and watching this, please put them in the ground, or give people, even from practical terms, give people a place to visit to memorialize the dead. If you are fortunate enough to have a place or a grave to visit, you can visit the grave, sprinkle it with holy water, say a rosary at the gravesite. That is still something you are allowed to do. Now, I also want to give a bit of commentary, at least a bit of a shout out to people who have far more complex situations. For example, I have a friend online whose background is, I believe, Hindu, if I recall correctly. His mother was Catholic, his father was Hindu. He wasn't baptized, but later converted to the Catholic faith later on. In Hinduism, apparently, it is expected of the firstborn son, i.e., this Catholic guy, to do certain Hindu funeral rites so that his father can pass on to the next life. As a traditional Catholic, he absolutely cannot do so. You cannot pass it on to others. There are people who are Jewish. If you are become a Catholic faithful to tradition, and there are converts from Judaism to traditional Catholicism, they cannot say Kaddish for the dead or pass it on to someone else. These things are situations we just have to grin and bear for the sake of Jesus Christ. And anyone who's thinking about becoming a Catholic faithful to tradition from these backgrounds, these are things you should consider and potentially even talk about before you make that decision. That it will mean, look, I can't do these these things. I cannot go to this funeral. I cannot do this. I cannot do that. You have to be ready to lay it down. You're going to have to figure out what it's going to have to... It is something you should think about. Especially, the convert experience is far more complex than it is for people who come from a traditional Catholic background, a traditional Catholic family. There's a little more understanding, and they're not as in the fray of it. When someone they know passes away, they're not generally expected to give the eulogy or arrange a funeral. When you're a convert, you still are. And it's extremely difficult. It's extremely painful. Unfortunately, to people in this situation, I am not that familiar with how to handle these situations. I'm actually now that I'm thinking of it, I may actually make a part 2 of this at some point in the future, address for people in this situation. Anyway, God bless. Have a great day. And please pray for the repose of my friend Pat Moore. And pray for the repose of anyone who you may know who may have passed, who, in visible terms, seems to have passed away outside of the Catholic Church. Just in case. God bless, and if you get a chance, please check it on SSPX Chapel. Make the Stations of the Cross for yourself and those who passed on. God bless.